So after my last video, where I covered some of the bug fixes and changes in the 1.0095 update, I realized that the versioning of the patch was right at the tail end of what looks like a potential milestone. Like Bohemia Interactive were tying up loose ends before moving forward with a new foundation, so to speak. Now, I'm not a very smart guy, but it does seem like the next update we get will probably be in the 1.1 territory. And it made me realize that time keeps marching on and there's so much potential to be seen with Arma Reforger and the new engine. So in this video, I kind of want to say my piece about some of the features that I wish Reforger had that I think would make a great foundation for Arma 4, in the hopes that there is some small chance that they be considered before Reforger gets too quote-unquote mature. Before I do this, I think it's important to note that I won't be going over features that we already know are coming, like AI commanding or destructible environments, but instead focus on features that would enhance the atmosphere and intensity of the things that make an Arma title an Arma title. And guys, if you get value out of my videos, please consider becoming a channel member as well as joining us on my Discord, the Band of Beardos. With that said, since I have most people's attention right now, I'd like to start my first feature suggestion with something that's likely controversial and going to get a lot of conversations going in the comments. And that is Suppression. Oh, did you leave your comment yet? I know suppression is a hot topic for many players, and I don't think Bohemia necessarily has to copy Squad. However, what Squad does get right about suppression, in my opinion, is how the system is able to modify player behavior, which is what this feature is really about. Recently, I was playing Arma 3 with the suppression mod by Laxman, who, interestingly enough, is now a BI dev, and a funny thing happened. If I can describe what I was feeling in a single word, it would be the word intense. My heart was racing, my head was flinching from each bullet. I was confused, not knowing whether I had been shot or not, and it all resulted in me burying my face in the ground until it all stopped. Now, I've never been in a gunfight before, fair enough, but I imagine those who have might have experienced a huge adrenaline rush, shaky, wobbly legs and hands, loose dexterity in their fingers, increased heart rate and breathing, probably tunnel vision, and maybe even more. You know, all the same symptoms you get when you saw Adam Sandler's performance in Uncut Gems. Just me, huh? Instead of what we have now, with peeking and shift Wing and strafe spamming, suppression becomes a real battlefield tactic that can be deployed strategically. If there are no consequences for receiving gunfire, players don't mind peeking, and because this is a video game, let's face it, players don't really care about their virtual lives much at all. So in a way, a suppression system makes your character care about your virtual life for you, and helps to modify your behavior accordingly. I also have some ideas that might be an interesting way to tie it into conflict. For example, as we know in conflict, the longer you play the match, the more experience your character gets. However, ranks above Sergeant aren't really all that valuable currently. So my idea would be to tie the intensity of the suppression to your rank or experience level. Like Majors are affected the least, but there's still an effect that is meaningful. Anyways, I just wanted to get that off my chest. Now this feature I don't think is controversial at all, and to be honest, I was kind of surprised to see it missing from the medical update. Of course, I'm talking about carrying and dragging bodies of wounded, unconscious, and heck even dead soldiers. I think a feature like this really adds to the atmosphere and immersion that Bohemia are building with Reforger, not to mention practical and strategic qualities of being able to perform your duties as a medic. As it exists right now, people need to be worked on where they fell unless there's an ambulance nearby, and that's just a shame because players have learned really quickly that ambulances are just big giant targets and rarely use them for their intended purpose. Which is also a shame because I've never felt the need to transport wounded soldiers back to a base since they can be fully healed by themselves once their bleeding stops. Hiding your ambulance somewhere and carrying the wounded to it for a full healing seems like it would be more feasible than what currently happens, which is pretty much nothing. Indeed, making sure your mags are fully loaded before each possible encounter will definitely help you stay alive, should those extra few bullets be the deciding factor between you and your enemy. But ensuring you are fully loaded at all times comes at a cost. After having a nice, brisk firefight under the cool of the day from the setting sun, and expending much of my ammo, I often find myself with multiple magazines that are either half used or mostly empty. So, the feature that I wish Reforger had is simply a way to take out the bullets from my empty magazines and consolidate them into other ones during any lulls in the fighting. Now, I don't know about you, but when I go to the arsenal to change my loadout, I kind of feel like I'm at one of those storage unit auctions looking through all the stuff to find what I might be interested in. I mean, the arsenal that we have now is great for picking up odds and ends we need, but I believe the way we create our loadouts for our character can be presented much better, and Bacon's work in progress Loadout Manager mod proves it. In fact, it's pretty much exactly what I had in mind when thinking about a better loadout creation process, and I wish Bohemia Interactive would implement something like this in Reforger. Something that's persistent outside of the server with the ability to load it if the server has those items available. What do you think? The Eden editor from Arma 3 is probably one of the most requested features for Reforger, and I have no doubt that Bohemia has heard those cries loud and clear. The question is, can it make its way into Reforger, or is it only for Arma 4? My hope is the former, because an editor like this might benefit from thorough testing and feedback from the community before making its way into Arma 4 as a day one flagship feature, but also to make scenario creation more accessible to a wider audience. Currently, we do have the workbench tools for Reforger, which honestly is way more powerful than Arma 3's Eden editor, but it does have quite the steep learning curve. Firing from vehicles is honestly a really cool feature that I'm sure it's quite complicated to make, as you have to account for velocities of different moving objects that are networked together. But it's a good thing they already have an idea on how to implement something like that from Arma 3. I imagine trucks fully loaded with soldiers roaming around Monty doing drive-bys with RPGs and machine guns.
Make it so.
Moving on. If you watch any of my gameplay videos, you probably notice that I tend to aim at the ground a lot. For many of you, this might irritate your OCD, and for those who know, you know. Basically what I'm doing is lowering my weapon so I can look over the sights and get a clearer picture of what's in my view without obstructions. And since Reforger doesn't simulate looking through your optics or sights using both eyes, allowing you to see past the rear sight or housing, it's kinda necessary for me. That's usually what an aiming dead zone is for. Essentially, the aiming dead zone refers to the space around your crosshair where your weapon can freely move without moving the rest of your character's body. And this is a feature that's present in Arma 3, which I'd love to see brought over to Reforger, as it helps greatly with situational awareness. Speaking of situational awareness, the Arma series has always had the ability to move your head independent of your body, called Free Look. Why is this an important feature? Using Free Look to look around significantly reduces your quote-unquote movement profile, making you harder to detect, as well as helping pilots see around them for their own situational awareness. And Reforger carries on this feature, but unfortunately, proper head tracking implementation, it does not. Head tracking hardware like TrackIR and Tobii Eye Tracker are incredible immersion tools that allow you to move your in-game character's head using your real head, giving you hands-free access to the Free Look function in real time. Now, these systems actually are available in Reforger for TrackIR, but the problem is that the implementation has remained half-finished and barely functional, while Tobii doesn't seem to be a consideration at all, which is a shame because in my opinion, it's a better product. Right now, if you want to get TrackIR to be somewhat functional, you have to lower the sensitivity curves quite significantly, and even if you do get settings you're happy with, you will need to completely center your screen if you ever need to select some of the out-of-reach action menu prompts. So yeah, Bohemia, can we has proper head tracking implementation, please? The 1980s setting of Reforger is brilliant, and the design decisions of not showing your location on the map, I get it, I really do. It makes sense and forces people to learn navigation. It feels immersive, and I get a sense of accomplishment when I figure out where I am. But at the same time, there are a few side effects to the player experience. One of those side effects is that it makes it quite difficult for squads and groups to stay together. To combat this, Bohemia enabled the ability to see your squad leader's marker on the map, which was a good thing. However, after many hours of conflict, I still find myself confused on where I should go, as I inevitably find myself in the respawn screen. Where is the greatest need? Where are most of our forces? Where should I spawn? Did the rest of my squad get wiped? These are the kind of questions I find myself asking, because even though you can see the squad leader's marker position on the map doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of their squad is with them. So for this reason, a feature I would like to see are the locations of everyone on my team, but only for the deployment screen, so I can make better decisions on where to spawn in and rejoin the fight. As immersive as Reforger is, there's still much potential for a world and environment that is truly believable. And I'm speaking, of course, about civilians. Not those islands packed to the brim with military-aged men from Arma 3, but real civilians living realistic behavior trees. I'm talking men, women, children, young people, old people, short people, fat people, all of it. Seeing civilians on the battlefield reacting to evolving lines of combat and chaos would be a treat for the storytellers among us, especially if civilians were incorporated into conflict somehow. For example, perhaps special missions and tasks could be made for evacuating civilians from combat areas, increasing the supplies you're able to generate at the bases you take them to where medics can heal them. Maybe they can be used as hostages where the opposing team needs to rescue them. I don't know, just a thought. Similar to civilians, another emergent gameplay aspect to Reforger that I see quite often is the capturing and disarming of enemy combatants after a firefight. Personally, I think it would be cool if Bohemia leaned into this aspect of gameplay a little bit with a proper surrender and prisoner mechanic. I imagine it can work like giving players the ability to raise up their hands and surrender to an enemy team. They could be handcuffed and the enemy team can transport them back to their base for experience points and supplies. Maybe even provide some intel, such as a randomized enemy squad marker that pops up for a short time. In executing someone surrendering or a prisoner who is handcuffed would cost you a rank for committing a war crime. What do you think? Way back in the day, I played this PvP mod for Arma 3 called Tactical Battlefield, and one of the features they were testing out was a mod that enabled the wind to affect bullet trajectories. I wish I had footage of this, as it was pretty cool to see your tracers start out going towards your target, only to be pushed away in the direction of the wind. In order for marksmen to hit their targets, they would need to adjust their scopes based on the wind speed and direction. Having a feature like this in Reforger seems like it would be right at home, and it would be cool to see how firefights evolve when players need to level up their skills as engagement ranges get longer. Speaking directly to the Infusion engine for a moment, I think it's great that we can finally experience Arma with full servers at more than 40 frames per second. The lighting and sounds are absolutely beautiful, no doubt, and the fact that it renders shadows at a distance is fantastic. But as you probably guessed, I also think it should be able to do a little bit more, particularly as the next Arma title, because a problem that still exists is the fact that you can be easily spotted by other players while you're trying to sneak around. I'm talking, of course, about distant grass rendering. You think you're concealed because you have a lot of grass and shrubbery in your face, but players beyond 100 or so meters can spot you crawling around like a sore thumb. In a PvE environment where you're playing against the AI, who cares? But in a PvP environment where things get competitive, it becomes a really big issue. And my hope is that Bohemia find a way to solve this issue. Plus, it just looks better. If you've played Reforger for any length of time, no doubt you found yourself flipped over in a ditch through, no fault of your own. I mean, I don't think I have to explain this very much, other than to say that it would be nice if Bohemia implemented an official way that we can unflip vehicles and recover them without having to find a game master. I know the developers have already stated that they don't plan on adding any tanks or tracked vehicles into Reforger, but that doesn't mean I don't still want to see them, as their existence on the battlefield just adds to the strategic and tactical dynamics of advancing your forces and conquering objectives, which brings with it more depth to the game. Speaking of adding depth to the game, I always thought it was a bit strange that all of these maps seem to be based around islands. Likely this is because islands are easier to make quote-unquote complete, because with inland maps, you have to have an ending to it somewhere. With that said, there is a big opportunity that I think Bohemia is missing with Conflict, and that is the addition of boats and naval warfare. I imagine the ability to unlock an aircraft carrier that players can float around the map and launch amphibious assaults on coastal locations, while enemy teams can send crews to destroy it or place mines in the water. Airplanes and jets are another feature that I wish Arma Reforger had, and even more so since the addition of helicopters. Airplanes and jets introduce dynamic combat scenarios that challenge players to adapt and innovate on the fly, no pun intended. Imagine dogfights in the skies to coordinated airstrikes on ground targets, all contributing to a heightened sense of immersion because aerial engagements add an extra layer of excitement and intensity to battles. Yes, please. It's no secret that Arma Reforger has moved away from the Steam workshop in favor of their own in-game workshop, and I'm not going to say whether one is better than the other. Do I miss Steam? I don't really have an opinion. However, one thing I did appreciate about the mods on the Steam Workshop was the ability to see comments and responses from the creator, which I feel is missing from Reforger's workshop, since many mod makers don't really provide much context as to what their add-on actually does. And if there are important workarounds to be aware of, they're usually found in a comment somewhere. One major headache that I've had in the past is when I try to play with friends, back when I had some. I usually have to communicate outside of the game in order to coordinate the joining of a server or speaking to them when I'm in the respawn screen for where to deploy next. In my opinion, it would be great if this could be addressed directly from inside the game with a feature that enables some social aspects, such as having a friends list and seeing which servers they're on, with the ability to join them and even talk to them. Speaking of servers, I imagine I'm not the only one who has tried playing with friends and the server fills up. Now you could argue that you can just join another server, but for certain servers in local regions, this might not be an option. But whatever the case or reason, it would be nice to see a server queue feature so we don't have to spam the join button. Just saying. How many times has this happened to you? You get to the perfect Overwatch position with a clear view of an area you know the enemy team will be attacking from, and your only option is to either stand up in the middle of the room or mount up square dab in the middle of the window. So many times I've wished that there was a feature to move objects or rearrange furniture so I can mount up in a strategic position without exposing myself, like a true sniper. The lack of this feature is rather odd as well because when Bohemia released the Mines update, they hinted at this very possibility, so I wonder if they're just leaving it up to modders to implement. And last but not least, I think we can all agree that Everon is a beautiful map, and with the help of the workbench, we'll see many more locations. For this reason, I think an awesome feature that I wish Reforger had was seasons and biomes for various locations. Imagine fighting in the mountains, and instead of raining, it begins to snow and cover the ground. Or lower areas begin to fill up with thick fog in the morning, or huge waves form on certain sides of the island during certain periods. And it all happens dynamically, but maybe that just might be a little too ambitious. So, what do you think? Do you have a similar wish list for Reforger? If you've forgotten about some of the major features that are still yet to come, then watch this video next. This is Ironbeard, and I'll see you on the battlefield.